Man, it's getting real crucial on the recruiting trail for the Auburn Tigers. Auburn actually loses 2 commits in 1 week, which of course is going to garner some news because, everybody's kind of looking for Auburn to, I wouldn't say looking for Auburn to fail, but I mean, people are not just jumping off the rafters just hoping that Auburn is all of a sudden one of the more successful teams in the SEC. Auburn has always been kind of that dark horse team that everybody kind of sort of loves to hate out there in the deep South where college football is king. And on the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. Got another car cast. I really don't like doing the car cast, but, I want to continue to get back into doing the videos. And sometimes with what I do, it kind of creates some time constraints. Once again, my name is Kennard Vernon Stewart. That is my government name. My stage name is Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle. Now, you do know, and most of you Auburn fans know, that when things happen like this, Auburn fans automatically push the panic button. Now, I understand why. Because the past few seasons for Auburn have been disappointing at best. I mean, that's just really putting it mildly. 6-7 seasons, 7-6. I mean, just really hasn't done well since that 9-4 season for Auburn in 2019, and definitely hasn't even come close to what Auburn was able to accomplish in 2017 with the SEC championship game against Georgia and having the opportunity to face 2 number 1 teams within a couple of weeks, beating both of them by double digits. But injuries down the stretch, what we're going to talk about, lack of recruiting down the stretch, lack of adjustments down the stretch in that 2017 season. It was just really disappointing how that thing turned out, especially when we look at Kerryon Johnson in that year. Kerryon Johnson did some phenomenal things, but he was clearly hurt. He was clearly injured after that Alabama game. And, Gus Malzahn and his staff continued to utilize him as if he was full steam. Now, I'm not going to be irresponsible and make the bold prediction that a healthy Kerryon Johnson would have, won that 2017 championship game. But I will tell you guys is that Auburn was getting off to a really good start. And it looked like Auburn was on their way to beating Georgia 2 straight, but turnovers down in the red zone early in the football game against a really good football team in Georgia. I thought Georgia had a really good team that year. And to be fair, I don't think Auburn, it wasn't justifiable that Auburn beats a team like that 40-17, given the talent-to-talent ratio. It's really not even formidable that Auburn should have even won that game, but to win the game in the dynamic that they had the opportunity to, especially with the turnovers that they got, some of the uncharacteristic things that Georgia was doing in that game to put themselves in a position to where they just couldn't continue to compete down the stretch, losing that game 40-17, but ultimately getting it together, but beating Auburn in the SEC championship game 28-7. I think that game could have been a little bit more competitive from a score standpoint. I think Auburn did a really good job of trying to stay in that game despite the injuries, despite the turnovers in that game. But nonetheless, here we are a few years later where any decommit is going to cause a rift with the Auburn fan base because they feel like at this point there is no room for error for any coach that comes to Auburn. Auburn is now in an SEC stratosphere that has welcomed Texas and Oklahoma. Texas and Oklahoma have been largely successful against SEC teams. Oklahoma especially successful against Auburn. Guess who's on the schedule this year? Oklahoma for Auburn. In a good sense, Oklahoma is a home game for Auburn But by and large, Oklahoma will be the more talented team. They do have a young quarterback that Auburn is really banking on, getting some pressure on him and getting some of that Auburn magic to put Auburn in a position to win that particular football game. They got Arkansas and then got Georgia as the first road game. And I'm telling you, if Hugh Freeze is going to make any noise in this recruiting class, 2025, he has little to no room for error in the first few ball games of the year. And I'm going to boldly say that it is all but in Auburn's best interest, considering that all of those games are at home. It's in Auburn's best interest to figure out how to win all of those games and be undefeated going into that Georgia game. Because not only will that bolster some confidence in those football players, that will bolster some confidence in the fan base, and that will also bolster some serious recruiting momentum for the Auburn Tigers heading into National Signing Day, or the early signing period, which has actually become the National Signing Day in December. Now, unfortunately, now on the front end, this is some very unfortunate news for the Auburn Tigers. You talk about a huge need, especially on the defensive side of the football field, as Auburn is still trying to recover. In my opinion, Auburn is trying to recover from some horrible, in comparison to the folks they got to play against, I think some really horrible recruiting. And Hugh Freeze is kind of taking the burn in, and he really took a chance in coming into Auburn to try to kind of piece this thing together to come up with a football team that could compete for championships. But Auburn is way behind. And when Auburn loses a blue chip football player, or at least at the moment, it could be a loss for the Tigers. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes because a lot of the folks get on these social media platforms, these fans, they get on these social media platforms and they think they're the experts with the NIL and understand, oh, well, he left Auburn because of the money. And we don't know that. We don't know the particular ins and outs of the NIL. We do know that, or at least it's public information, that the typical starter on a Power 5 football team, especially when you talk about teams in the SEC, probably make about $45,000 a year in NIL money. But on the back end, you could be talking about even more, and that's where that whole money thing comes about. Auburn had two high-profile players to decommit this past week, two blue-chip players, and by blue-chip, I mean 4-star or better. The first one, Tyler Lockhart, 4-star linebacker from Winona, Mississippi. He's actually opened his recruitment back up. He gave the whole little heartfelt thing, after talking to my family. I want to open this thing back up. Now, for some of you cup half empty guys, this is a long time before signing day, at least the first one, where most of the guys make the commitment. Because gone are the days of the whole dramatic, you got the hats on the table and blah, blah, blah. Guys are going and getting this thing done in December now. But he's opened his recruitment back up. He visited Auburn June the 7th. But he had a recent visit in his home state. Took a recent trip to Mississippi State. And that was like a few days ago, like a couple of days ago, actually, June the 30th. And he decommitted. Actually, he committed. He decommitted. He visited on the 21st, and then he wound up decommitting a week later from Auburn after that visit. Now, maybe there were some things that opened his eyes. He didn't commit to Mississippi State. He didn't commit to anybody. He just decommitted from Auburn. He decommitted his pledge. And, one thing about these college kids that you have to understand, and I remember just even trying to pick a school that I'm going to hang out at for the next 4 years, I kind of want to make sure I'm right about this. This is a huge decision. Folks can call this guy a traitor. They can say, well, if you're not going to commit, then don't, whatever. There's a good possibility that, DJ Jerkin, defensive coordinator, he's a new guy there. Maybe he'll see some things as the season progresses that will allow him to see where he will fit and maybe find some success. I mean, this guy's super talented, so I think Auburn should continue to pursue him just like they've been doing other players. He had a great 2013 season with 100 tackles, 28 for a loss. I mean, that's huge for high school. 11 sacks and 3 forced fumbles. I mean, I think he's got a nice track for the football. He has some incredible instincts. He has some power at the point of attack. He takes great angles. I think this is somebody that Auburn should continue to pursue, and I think this is a huge loss. His closing speed is amazing and has an instant fire ability to create turnovers. Auburn will actually lose Austin Keys at linebacker and Eugene Asante this year. And although Auburn has freshmen, Marcus Riddick projected to return in 2025, DJ Barber and Robert Woodyard, a redshirt freshman, I mean, Auburn really needs to continue their pursuit of linebackers in their class. I mean, you got some guys that can convert from the buck position, but when looking at the Gus Malzahn era, we don't need no converts. Say, for instance, I'll use Boobie Whitlow for an example. I mean, a last-minute recruit from Lafayette, Georgia. I absolutely love Boobie Whitlow while he was here. But my problem is, a team like Auburn should not have to be recruiting quarterbacks to convert them to running backs. I think that was a telltale sign of the Gus Malzahn, the latter end of the Gus Malzahn recruiting era. I'm not going to say the guy got a little bit lazy, but the proof was in the pudding. A lot of ineffective recruiting during that time. I would say one of the most lethal out of these two decommits at the moment is the decommitment of Cardi Smith, offensive tackle for Auburn. That's a blue chip guy. He's actually the only blue chip offensive lineman, although Auburn has made a really huge effort and a real huge statement in recruiting offensive linemen. Still got some in the class, but my thing is they got to figure out a way to make up for some serious ground that was dropped in the last 3 or 4 seasons. Gus Malzahn kind of dropped the ball. Brian Harsin definitely dropped the ball. And, you get a blue chip guy. I think you got to figure out a way to either retain or, of course, I know Hugh Freeze got some guys down the pipeline, but this is something that has to be rectified for the Tigers to have some success. Now, luckily, a lot of you fans are kind of moping around and are like, well, Auburn went from a top 10 team and now all a top 10 team recruiting, but all the way down to 13. But you got to be careful of the number that you're looking at. The number that you need to look at is, one, the number of recruits. Auburn only has 14 recruits. And at 91%, that puts them in the upper trajectory. In if they had, say, 22 recruits at, say, 91%, Auburn would still be a top 10 class. The only reason why the Auburn dropped from a top 10 class, because, hell, you lost 2 4-star recruits. And you only have 14 that have committed. So that's something that you got to look at. All right, guys, definitely unfortunate for Auburn. I think Auburn will recover. Go ahead and like the video, comment, and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger.